Good morning. Today is lecture 15B. We've literally got one more lecture after today. Will be Thursday tomorrow. I will not lecture. I've got some things going on. I'll be just not available. But we'll be moving right along. I will email out the test tomorrow to the respective schools. Final is looking to be Friday. I'll hopefully get all the grades and everything caught up over the weekend into next week. I've just been a little busy, haven't got everything graded yet. No reaction quizzes or quizzes this week. Your final grade is your final. Makeup days will be next Monday, Tuesday. That way I can hopefully have everything wrapped up and graded by the end of next week and get your grades to you. Okay, the making of radical reconstruction. So we talked about yesterday about blacks trying to gain new rights and what it looks like. Today we'll talk about radical reconstruction and how that will look in the South and the North. Okay, the new president is Andrew Johnson. Lincoln was assassinated at the beginning of 1865, April. Pretty sad event. Has a huge effect on the United States because if Lincoln had been alive during Reconstruction probably would have went much different. Andrew Johnson, who was the vice president, was a Democrat actually. From a former slave state, born into poverty, remained in the Union when his state left the Union, so he remained loyal. He was racist. He hated bloated, corrupt autocracy, so he was not overwhelmingly pro changing all the slavery and everything like that. So he's going to be kind of a sluggard with that. Lacked Lincoln's political skills, stubborn, intolerant of criticism, unable to compromise, and he's going to be really more sympathetic to the South that some might have liked. Now, the failure of presidential reconstruction in May of '65, he outlined his plan reuniting the Union. This will last for 2 years, from 1865 to '67. Offered a pardon to nearly all white Southerners who took an oath and allegiance back to the United States, no questions asked. Excluded Confederate leaders and wealthy planters whose pre-war property had been valued at more than $20,000. So the elites are going to be barred from influence. Most of the exempted soon received individual pardons, however, from the president himself. Appointed governors who were tasked to take conventions, established local governments in the South. The actions of Southern governments turned the Republican North against the president, though, because given this much power, these Southern governments are going to try to reinstitute what they had previously. What you're going to get also from this is a photo of him, Andrew Johnson, our 17th president. You can obviously see he looks like a very hard man compared to Lincoln, not as warm or outgoing. What this is going to ultimately lead to, though, is black codes. Aroused most opposition to Johnson. Black codes were laws passed by the new Southern governments that attempted to regulate the lives of former slaves. These black codes are early Jim Crow laws, but essentially they are trying to reinstitute slavery by allowable methods. Declared that those who failed to sign yearly labor contracts could be arrested and hired out to white owners, thus a return to a form of slavery. Most of the Union's army was swiftly demobilized. Most policy hate was the inability of South's political leaders to accept the reality of emancipation as evident by the black codes. So basically, Northerners are going to be appalled that Southerners are unwilling to accept the realities of a changed landscape. Thus, this is going to lead to what we call the Radical Republicans. In December of 1865, Johnson announced that with loyal governments functioning in all Southern states, the nation had been united. However, we know that is not going to be the case. Radical Republicans call for new governments without rebels and guaranteeing the right to vote to the blacks. The most prominent radicals in Congress were Charles Sumner, Senator, and Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives. Thus, you're going to have the origins of the Civil Rights Movement and the 14th Amendment. When I say Civil Rights Movement, this is the original movement to expand rights for African Americans, though this will not really, well, there's still a struggle today in some aspects, but it won't reach its apex really until the 1960s, so about 100 years later. It was born in the 1860s. Most Republicans were moderates, not radicals, majority in Congress without the South being represented. They refused to seat Southerners recently elected, but allowed Southern governments to remain, meaning they didn't allow them to vote on things at the federal level, but they allowed the governments to remain at the state level. The Civil Rights Bill of 1866 defined all persons born in the United States as citizens and spelled out rights that were to enjoy without regard to race. Also extended to Freedmen's Bureau. Johnson vetoed both laws, thus neither one of them became legal. Freedmen's Bureau override failed by a single vote in Congress, though extended later on. Civil Rights Bill became the first major law in American history to be passed over a presidential veto. So this Civil Rights Bill of 1866 will be written over with a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate, the first time that had been done ever. The 14th Amendment will be a product of this. Congress now went on its own plan of Reconstruction. They're basically going to disagree with the president every step. It declared that the principle of citizenship for all persons born in the United States and empowered the federal government to protect the rights of Americans. Basically, anyone born in the United States is a U.S. citizen. It clarified that, put into pen a lot of rights that were being trampled upon that many people took advantage of. Making a radical Reconstruction 4. The Reconstruction Act. Johnson went on a speaking tour of the North, made it wild accusations of radicals were planning to assassinate him, kind of went off the deep end. At Johnson's urgence, all the southern states but Tennessee refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. The Reconstruction Act, radical Reconstruction, passed in March of 1867 to undermine the president. Now, obviously Johnson and Congress are not going hand in hand. He's trying to get the South to undermine the 14th Amendment, trying to go on like a speaking tour, like how the Republicans are trying to kill me and all this. Impeachment and election of Grant. The 10-Year Office Act, barring the president from removing certain office holders without the consent of the Senate. Johnson fired Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton. And just this general disagreement over the whole Reconstruction process, the 14th Amendment. Articles of impeachment will be brought. 35 to 19 failed to convict, remove from office. He is impeached by the House, but it fails to remove him from office, 35 to 19. However, this, in short, nullifies any future Andrew Johnson had in politics or as president. He's a lame duck. In 1867 or 1868, Grant will be nominated for the Republican Party as the president, and he will win election fairly easy. Maybe not the most qualified to be president, but he was a unification element for the North in the Republican Party. Grant was a bitter election, though. The Democrats openly appealed to racism, but in the end, Grant will win the election. The 15th Amendment will come about, making a radical Reconstruction 5. Grant will win by 300,000 votes. It's a pretty sizable margin for the population this time, but it's still fairly close. Electoral college-wise, I think he was pretty comfortable. 15th Amendment prohibited the federal and state governments from denying any citizen the right to vote because of race. The 15th Amendment, it basically extends rights to blacks to vote, not women. It just says race, not gender. The Great Constitutional Revolution. Expansion of rights for not only whites but blacks as well. Redefined the role of national government in the states. The national government asserts its authority between the 13th and 15th Amendments, protecting and expanding rights for African Americans and minorities. Rights of women will still be lagging behind. Women tried to join the transformation movement, but women did not gain any more rights than they already had. Radical Reconstruction in the South. We've got a couple slides here and we'll be done for the day, and we'll finish up on Thursday. Blacks were confident on nothing less than equality across the board. Or content, not confident, content. They wanted equality across the board, which makes sense. Thousands will register to vote. By 1870, all former Confederate states have been readmitted to the Union or the United States, and blacks will exercise their right to vote. The new state constitutions drafted in 1868 and 1869 were the first with substantial black representation. So the new constitutions to come about in the South, you have actually opportunity for blacks to vote. There will be some elected. The whole point of this is expansion of rights for the South. The black office holder. Blacks voted, provided the bulk of Republican Party support in the South. Some 2,000 African Americans helped public support during the Reconstruction era. Hiram Rivals became the first black senator in American history. In South Carolina and Louisiana, most prominent Reconstruction office holders had never experienced slavery, though. Meaning, some of these people who were prominent never had been slaves, so they were the upper class even of the black society. Radical Reconstruction in the South, too. Carpetbaggers and scallywags. Carpetbaggers were Northerners who came to the South to help influence politics in the South. They're Northerners. They are called carpetbaggers by the bags they usually use to come down and travel with and go around with. Scallywags were Southerners who openly worked with Northerners to try to rebuild and bring the South back into the Union. Hence why it's kind of more of a derogatory term. Scallywag sounds like someone you detest. Southern Republicans in power. Perhaps the greatest achievement of Reconstruction governments was the establishment of the South's first state-supported public school system. The South, most people don't realize, lagged severely behind the North's education system, and thus were a lot more illiterate than Northerners. The new governments also pioneered civil rights legislation, took steps to strengthen the position of rural laborers and promote the South's economic recovery. Ultimately, though, the quest for prosperity will be one for all, pinned hopes on regional economic development and changing the South's way of life. In general, economic development remained weak, though, in the cities is where stuff will really develop in the South. However, for the first time, we'll have a biracial democratic government in the South. The whole point of this is the South, in this radical Reconstruction phase, is going to see expansion for blacks' rights. So from 1867 to about the early 1870s, African Americans will see a rapid expansion of rights that they will execute, and there will be change. However, as we'll learn on Thursday when we wrap up this lecture series, is that those rights that they've gained will unfortunately be reversed. Have a good day.